Hello, everybody, and welcome on behalf of California State Parks to Hearst San Simeon State Historical Monument. My name is Calleen Berg, and I have the pleasure of sharing with you today a very special part of what is now called Hearst Castle. The reason it is so special is that it's a painting, but it was not purchased by Mr. Hearst. And those of you that are familiar with the collection, he collected everything from antique ceilings to Greek pottery and tapestries. What makes this painting especially significant, as I said, is Mr. Hearst did not purchase it. His mother, Phoebe Hearst, commissioned this painting, and it is the only painted portrait of your host, William Randolph Hearst. And also meaningful is that it was painted by what many would say was Mr. Hearst's oldest and dearest friend, artist Orrin Peck. Are you ready? We're going to make a trip up to the third floor, the Gothic Suites, to see this special painting. Here we are in the Gothic study on the third floor of Casa Grande. This was a private floor. In fact, many guests would share the fact that they never got to visit this entire suite, which, by the way, has 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a sitting room. And would you believe this space that Mr. Hearst could call? Well, we could call it his home office. And what that tells you is the man, although this started out as a vacation home, would be very hands-on with what he created in his life. Now, there's so much about this remarkable space with the Gothic ceiling, the books lining the walls, and yet more of his collection of art. But I can tell you firsthand as a guide here for many years, without a doubt, when people walk into this room, it draws wows, and then the curiosity of the portrait across the room. That man, that young man, I should say, that takes command of the room. And that is the portrait of a young 31-year-old William Randolph Hearst. And what's really pretty exciting about this is that this would never have happened had it not been at the insistence of his mother. I think on some level, maybe all of us can relate to doing things for our mothers and our fathers, and this we're very grateful for, I can say. Now, how did this come about? It wasn't easy, although Mrs. Hearst and her husband George Hearst, as well as her parents, have all sat for a painting with Orrin Peck. But it's all about that close relationship that would develop between William Hearst and his best friend, Orrin Peck, as well as the relationship, the very close relationship and trusting relationship Phoebe Hearst had with Orrin Peck. Let's get a little bit closer to this painting. This very important relationship in both Mr. Hearst and Phoebe Hearst's life begins early on. 1862, a newlywed Phoebe Hearst is traveling with her new husband, George Hearst, on the Panama steamer on their way to San Francisco, where they're going to live. On that momentous occasion, they meet Mr. and Mrs. Peck and a young Orrin Peck of only 2 years old. What's especially meaningful about this trip as well is that Phoebe Hearst is pregnant with William Randolph Hearst, only child in their life, by the way. Now, this relationship is one that lasts a very long time, throughout their lives, as a matter of fact, because for one thing, Orrin's mother, Mrs. David Peck, provides great comfort to Phoebe Hearst. This is quite a journey to take on a ship to San Francisco. And Orrin Peck, I will say, enchanted her from the very beginning. A delightful little 2-year-old, and that only grew, that relationship, through the years. In fact, letters between Orrin and Phoebe Hearst, she would address him as her other son. Not only that, she would sign it off and saying, your loving mother. That tells you a lot about this relationship. Basically what I'm saying is that Orrin becomes family, a best friend to William Hearst throughout his life, in fact. He also learned the skill of reassuring Phoebe Hearst. And what I mean by that, when Phoebe would write concerned that, for instance, when William is attending Harvard, that he is going to ruin his life, well, Orrin had that way, just like his mother, of reassuring her, it's all going to be fine. So you get the feeling here, again, that this is family. So much so that Mrs. Hearst would be a benefactress. And what I mean by that is that she would provide an education for Orrin Peck, underwrite his schooling, his art studies in Munich. Also, his sister Janet, she provided her with music lessons. Now, as for the relationship with William Hearst, could not have been closer. They were always there for each other. Orrin Peck was even best man at Mr. Hearst's wedding and accompanied Mr. Hearst and Millicent Wilson Hearst on their honeymoon. Not unusual for that class, by the way, right? Now, the portrait, that story, timing is everything how this comes about. In 1892, this is a year after William Hearst's father, George Hearst, has passed away. William is now publisher of the San Francisco Examiner, but make no mistake, he's wanting more. He's looking to buy newspapers in New York, and that means he's spending more time away from San Francisco. And he's also traveling Europe, very common for the family. At this time, he's traveling separately from his mother, and the timing is perfect, as I said, because now she can fulfill her wish of a portrait of her son. Portraits have long been a tradition for families of wealth and power. And while Orrin Peck had painted portraits of Phoebe Hearst, George Hearst, and even her parents, it was about time for a portrait of William. Now, this painting tells you a lot. Portraits tell you a lot about a person, more than simply what did they look like. For one, this is a person of means, and the size alone tells you that. This is over 4 feet. The setting of where it takes place is something to look at. And it appears that Mr. Hearst is in an office or at a desk working. And of course, how he is dressed. Dapperly in a dark suit with a crisp white shirt. And you can't miss that pop of the red bow tie. And the style, the hair, the part in the center, and that handlebar mustache, perfectly groomed, tells you that this is likely the latter part of the 19th century. And importantly, what about this person? What are they like? Body language often tells you a lot. And in this instance, it almost looks like Orrin Peck, the artist, has interrupted a moment in time. After all, they're friends. I can almost imagine Orrin Peck walking in on Mr. Hearst as he's working. At his desk, you see some clues as well. He looks comfortable, right? A relaxed hand on the one side, and then on the other, a pen in hand, and maybe a book. Is he a writer? Is this a professional? And then perhaps the most striking of this portrait, the most striking element, many would say, is his expression, especially from his eyes. Many would describe them as piercing blue eyes. And as you look at this portrait, it almost as if he's following you with his eyes. He looks relaxed and focused at the same time. This is a private look of a 31-year-old man becoming what is considered one of the most powerful and influential forces in the history of American journalism. Now, this relationship had so much to it. In fact, years later, William Hearst would ask his good friend Orrin Peck to come to San Simeon and help Julia Morgan architect on the designs of the garden. He certainly would have had a lot more influence. However, during his stay here in San Simeon in 1921, he takes a short break to meet a friend in Los Angeles, and sadly, Orrin Peck suffered a heart attack. He was 60 years old. It must have been a difficult time for Mr. Hearst because just 2 years earlier, his mother, Phoebe Hearst, had passed away from the influenza. Mr. Hearst, on the other hand, lived a very long life. In fact, age 88, 1951 is when he passed away. We are fortunate here because while Mrs. Hearst donated, or should I say, willed the portrait to her eldest grandson, George Hearst Jr., Mr. and Mrs. George Hearst Jr. decided to donate that portrait here to the Hilltop so that all of our visitors could enjoy this experience of seeing a young William Hearst. I hope that you enjoyed your time seeing a little bit closer look at some of the important relationships in Mr. Hearst's life. Thank you all for joining me.